We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Dr. Thomas, if you can conduct another quick roll call for us.
Yes, ma'am. I will be happy to do that. Mr. Davis? Mr. Davis, I know he's here, right? Can you all hear me?
He's not here yet, I don't think.
Okay. Mr. Stevens?
Here.
Okay, he said yes. Ms. Palmer. Ms. Davis?
Here.
Dr. Yeager?
Here.
Dr. Dykeman?
Here.
Mr. Worthy?
Here.
Dr. Gant?
Here.
Dr. Knox?
Here.
Dr. Maddox?
Here.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move forward with our, I'll open the floor for a motion to amend or adopt the current agenda.
So moved. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you about to amend, John?
Yeah, well, since we just left the other meeting and said we'll discuss the budget, I didn't know if we needed to amend something. I will defer to legal counsel if we can discuss budget questions under this, just procedural.
Yeah, I really think you can. I mean, from the Department of Revenue standpoint, you're supposed to set the budget first and the millage rate second. In our case, since our millage rate is kind of capped out, it may have to work in reverse, but they're intricately linked. There's no problem.
Then let's go ahead with it. So I think Linda had a motion. Is that right?
Yes.
Second.
Yay.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, all in favor, if you would say aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? And any abstaining? Okay, we will move forward with our millage rate discussion as well as any additional questions. I'll turn the floor back over to Mr. Greiner, Dr. Thomas, and then Dr. Knox with your questions.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am, and I will turn it over to Mr. Greiner.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Thank you, Dr. Gant. Same presentation that we did at 1 o'clock today. Basically, Lisa, if you get to the second slide, please. Kind of give a little background on the why we have the millage rate hearings. Every year, tax assessor reassesses property. If there's an increase in those properties, by law, you're required to calculate what's called a rollback rate, the rollback millage rate, which that rollback millage rate would get you back to a point where there's not a tax increase. Even though we're not proposing increasing our millage rate, because as Mr. Pruitt said, we're capped out at 20 mils. It still represents, if your value went up, there is an increase because you're going to pay more in property tax. So the way to offset that would be to roll the rate back, and that rate's calculated, which we'll get to in a second. And that would negate any increase. Given our budget stance over the previous years, especially this year with the proposed cuts with the state level, the millage rate has stayed at 20 mils. If we were, we get a year where we propose rolling it back, you don't even have to have the hearings. If you decide to roll back at that rollback rate, you're done. You set the millage rate at the rollback rate, there's no public hearings. But if you don't roll it back, you have to have 3 public hearings to basically say it is a tax increase, even though we're not increasing the millage rate. So back on May 21st, the tentative millage rate was set at 20 mils, which is the same as last year. The reassessment of properties does produce a property tax increase in total of 5.74%. I emphasize in total because not everybody's going to see a 5.74% increase. It depends on how their house was reassessed from 2019 to 2020. So some property owners will see less. Some, it just depends on that reassessment. In order to get us to no increase, we would have to roll the millage rate back to 18.914 mils, which is a difference of 1.086 mils from the 20 mils. In order for us to roll it back, it would mean we would basically be losing, if we rolled it all the way back, roughly $5 million in revenue. And as I mentioned with our budget, constraints previously, and then looking especially this year, mostly if you look back over austerity being in place since 2003 until the last couple of years, and now we're faced with austerity again. It's just been the best interest of the school district to leave that millage rate at 20 mils. There's no way to go any higher than 20 mils constitutionally unless they change that. And it hasn't been proposed, I don't think in many years to go above 20. 20 is the cap, so we can't go any higher. So that's where we're at, and that's why we have these hearings, because we're leaving it at 20 mils and we're not rolling it back. If you reduce the millage rate to any level above the 18.914, you have to have hearings. So if one year decided to set it at 19 mils, for instance, you still have to have hearings. The only way you don't have to have hearings is if you do roll it back. And that rate is actually calculated on a form that the Department of Revenue issues. Here in Athens, Clarke County, the tax commissioner completes that form, and then each taxing jurisdiction verifies, the chief financial officer or finance director verifies that. In my case, I verified what Ms. Meadows sent over, and we agreed on the calculation and the rollback rate. So, and all this is required to be advertised, which we've done. We advertised last Tuesday that we would have these meetings tonight. There was an advertisement in the paper today that we'll have a meeting next Tuesday. All this follows the guidelines as set forth by the Department of Revenue. And trust me, they do check it, because when Ms. Meadow goes to get the tax digest certified, they will make sure we've done every one of these steps. And if there's a step that's out of place, they will make you go back and redo it. So it is a very, very proceduralized process that's been in law for many years, and you do have to, again, follow it step by step. So all this has been vetted with the tax commissioner's office, all our ads, everything else. We try to make sure we're in sync with them, since ultimately they're the ones who have to get the digest certified at the state level. So the next slide is just the value of a mill. I thought y'all might find this interesting. It's you can see this is how much the 1 mil has increased over since FY 2014. We're at about 4.5 million this year. So 20 mils roughly brings in 90 to 91 million, and then we pay the tax commissioner 2.5%, which is also by state law, to collect taxes for us. So we don't have to go do that. So that's typical across the state. And then that commission, of course, is used to help run the tax commissioner office, supplement, running of that office. And trust me, we are very glad they do that for us. Because that is, a very important job that they do. So anyhow, this is, you can just see what the value of a mill. The next slide is just what the timeline looks like. We're through June, almost through June 9th, and then we'll move to next Tuesday. We'll have another millage rate hearing. And then the plan is on June 25th, we've advertised that the final millage rate will be adopted at that call board meeting on June 25th. Right now, we just have a tentative millage rate of 20 mils until we have the hearings, and then we can set the final millage rate can be recommended and set at that point. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Again, we did this via Zoom. We ask any comments be emailed to Ms. Palmer, which I'll ask Ms. Palmer again if she had any comments. Did we lose Lisa? There she is.
No comment.
And we also had the direct line where people could call in if they were having, any internet issues. So that was all advertised in the ads we ran, and that was all vetted through our legal counsel, Mr. Pruitt.
Dr. Knox?
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, now I have a comment and 2 questions. So the comment is, and I just want to say this, so if anybody ever watches this on YouTube, the way I interpret what the state does with us is it's a very tilted playing field. And so we have big ads in the newspaper that talk about the property tax increase, when what it is our millage rate's the same, but the property value went up. And so which is common for us in lots of different ways, right? It's kind of like the way inflation works, only with property values. So it's almost like, kind of like a COLA increase, sort of. And so making a big honking deal about it, as we are required to do, is a little misleading, but it's even more misleading. And I just put this together because at the same time, the QBE, the state funding for us, is set at 1985 values and was never indexed for inflation for all these years. So it's a double whammy. The state, if the state's going to make us make a big deal in the papers about our property taxes going up when it's just essentially life, you know, it goes up as property values are increasing here, then they ought to fess up and make the same big deal about the fact that QBE is stuck back in Back to the Future territory in the mid 80s. And so this is really a comment more for anybody that ever watches this from the public. I think this is something to understand, that the playing field is tilted in terms of public perception. On both those, it's a double whammy. And I hadn't really put those two together till now. So that was a comment. And now I'll move on to questions 3 and 4 on the budget. I asked 1 and 2 over in the other hearing. And these are things that I haven't written Dr. Thomas about. Apologies, because they've been cropping up in my email, recent developments. And they're maybe a little awkward, and I don't expect an answer right now, but I wanted to ask them, and here I am. So question 3, how much would it cost CCSD, if anything, if we shifted away from employment of ACCPD people? That's just a question, because I know that some of the people on this call have been asking about it, but I don't know if that's been asked from a budget perspective. And I wanted to ask that from a budget perspective, so that if that is entertained at any point, we have some answers and we don't say, oh, gee, we hadn't looked at that yet.
I'll get those numbers for you. 1 second.
I think the
Do you
contract,
remember last year we had this conversation with the bringing our policing in-house?
Yes,
So,
when Dr. Thomas come back, I can answer those questions. Dr.
Yeah.
okay,
I think
And we
we
did-
voted on the $350,000 contract in January
Yes,
right.
for
And
the
it would-
6 officers.
and it would cost us, I think we did do analysis last year. Dr. Thomas, do you have that in front of you?
Right, if we hired and equipped those 6 officers ourselves, it would cost us a little over $750,000. And right now we pay $325, and that $750 would be in addition to, it's a little over $700,000 we're already paying for the officers we already have in our department, as well as the 8 unarmed security officers. So we have, is it 1 armed at each of our 3 high school campuses? And then we have 4 unarmed at Clark and 4 at Cedar. And then we have, the others are our school resource officers employed by ACCPD that are at Clark Central, Cedar Shoals, and the 4 middle schools.
For middle school.
So if we hired those 6, to hire and equip 6 officers would cost us about $750. And then we could subtract out the $325.
Okay. Good. And then a follow-up to that some of the other board members may be thinking is, and this is again not necessarily something that you have in your hip pocket right now, but what if we followed an out-of-the-box solution to it, and we were not replacing armed officers with armed officers, but with social workers or other things, as is being discussed around the nation right now in certain police departments?
I would speak to that just from my lens, and I had this conversation a little with Dr. Gant, and I also replied in a conversation with Mr. Stevens and Mr. Davis. I think that if you're looking to make a decision of that nature and magnitude, it's a decision that requires significant planning. I am not comfortable as leader of a school system making that decision with 6 to 8 weeks before school is scheduled to open. I think it's something that requires a lot of thought and planning. And in my conversation, Dr. Gann and I were actually talking about something else today, and I brought it up. I'm a social worker by training. I am totally 100% in support of having more mental health services for our families. And then I also recognize there are times when there are behaviors that may have some mental health underpinnings, but aren't necessarily mental health issues. And there are realities in our society that we all have to unfortunately reckon with that sometimes are due to people having behaviors that are not socially safe. So being at a school and there is a incident in the community and there is a armed individual on the run, or being in an incident where students have issues with each other in the community, which happens frequently. And yes, we do a lot with our counselors and existing social workers to mediate. Sometimes those students bring those issues with the sole intent of walking off of the street and addressing those issues in the school setting. And I just want to be conscious and not just conscious, but I want us to be very thoughtful in ensuring that we're able to have a safe environment from all lenses for our students. So safe from unnecessary police force, but also safe from other intrusions that enter the building. And one of my primary concerns, and I've shared this before, is that if we go to a place of removing all of any officers from our schools, there will be, whether we like it or not, incidents, and I would beg to say fairly regular incidents, where we will then have to call 911. And when you call 911, you run the risk of having officers who come in who are solely trained in street community type policing, which is very different than policing in a public school setting. Those officers have unique training aligned to working with adolescents, working with students, dealing with student mental health issues. And I have seen it, Dr. Knox, Mr. Stevens, Mr. Davis. I've seen it more than I would want to when law enforcement has to be called in and they are your regular routine, and I can't think of the right name, but your street enforcement officers. And they come in with a very different mentality than those who are in that building every day, who get to know the students, get to know the parents, they know their temperament, they know what triggers them. They're able to do a very good job. And it's not that I'm advocating for police. I'm just saying these are things that you can't change overnight. What do we do when a student shows up with a knife? What do we do when a student shows up with a gun? You dial 911. And the response is very different when someone comes in and they're trained as uniform officers versus working in a school. So that was probably a longer answer than you wanted. I am not totally against it, but I will have to go on record as saying I am very against making any decision of this magnitude with 8 weeks left. I don't think it's in the best interest of our students, our teachers, and our school community as a whole. I think that we will have a lot of backlash from that we won't be prepared to be able to respond to how we will handle such issues when they arise.
Dr. Thomas, I'd like to chime in here. You explained that beautifully. People, they don't realize, and let me just say this up front, having been a high school principal, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Having been a high school principal, having officers in a school is a plus. Now, let me just take it a little bit further than what you said, and you're correct. They are trained differently from officers out there on the streets every day. Now, one of the things that you have to keep in mind, those police officers are not only on campus there, especially at the high school level, probably the middle school level too, to control unruly students when a fight has taken place or whatever. You'll be surprised the number of things that police officers tipped me off as a principal, drug dealers coming on campus, okay? Coming on campus especially during what I called peak hours, mornings, when a whole bunch of, it was the entire student body moving around, buses coming in, etc. Then again, during lunchtime. Not as bad at lunchtime because I required all of them to have lunch in the cafeteria. Then again, after school, those kinds of things, you need those police officers to keep an eye on that. And as I said, I support having police officers on campus. Now, one other thing, security people that you had on campus before we brought police officers in schools. Those security people, they are certified. Many people don't realize this. They are certified police officers, and they also armed with a gun. So those kinds of things, people just don't realize. And I know what happened in the George Floyd situation and some other situations across this country. This is what people are all riled up about. But when you look at the school point of view, it's totally, totally different. And you mentioned one important thing there, Dr. Thomas. The students are familiar with those officers. That's a plus right there. You know, they see those officers in terms of being a help to them. Of course, now some going to be unruly, and when they're unruly, they have to be handled. But anyway, thank you.
In the budget,
Dr. Knox?
Yes, I had one more question, but with this one, as with the last one, as a board member, I encourage us to stay on the topic of budget and millage rate. All I asked about was the budget.
You're right about that.
Yes, and so questions like that might very well not look good to Cognitive, or comments like that. I think the question was on the budget, but the comment was not. Did Mr. Stevens have a statement?
Mr. Stevens?
yes, I just wanted to speak a second, being the person who actually sort of proposed this. And I'm not going to go fully in depth because, like John just said, this is not the place to do that. But one thing I will say is I am not accepting that argument that just was put forward. Because I've done a lot of work with March for Our Lives Georgia, so I know that there are solutions there. It just takes us going outside of the box of what is has become the norm in school districts across the country and in policing across the country. And when you're talking about timelines, well, several school districts have been able to do this ahead of their next school district. So it can be done. It just takes action and working together. And I'm looking forward to discussing this more beyond this.
Okay. Mr. Stevens, I think you cut off a little bit. I do know that we have another budget meeting coming up on the 16th. I will share that I interpreted people's responses as an extension of the budget question that was asked. I know Dr. Thomas also gave a reply as well to the budget question that was asked. And so, so yes, it definitely sounds like it's something that some of our board members would be interested in discussing more. We do have another meeting coming up on our budget. And certainly, you know, with anything, I definitely encourage you to reach out to each other, but even more so to Dr. Thomas, so that these questions and concerns can be addressed. I do appreciate the focus on budget because I do sort of see that that's where our areas are: budgeting, policy, evaluation, and strategic planning. And related to what Dr. Thomas has said, you know, this could certainly have implications for strategic planning in the future. But I do want to encourage people, if you still have questions or additional comments and things like that, certainly feel free to reach out to Dr. Thomas about those. Dr. Knox.
Yes. Question 4. And again, this is from a budgetary perspective. How much would it cost to reverse the decision on Classic City? For example, to hire a principal and to fill vacant staff positions?
We would have to pull that information for you, Dr. Knox, and we can get that information to you.
Thank you.
Dr. Knox, you finished? Dr. Knox?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I want to go back to, and this is a budgetary comment. You made a comment, and I thought that was a very valuable comment, pertaining to the amount of money or revenue we receive from the state versus, what we receive from local tax dollars. And see, one of the things I have thought about this in terms of what we can do about this. See, you mentioned the year of 1985, and that may have been the year when all of this started. Joe Frank Harris was the Governor Joe Frank Harris, that implemented the QBE law and the formula, FTE, full-time equivalence, et cetera. And and it's supposed to have been the best thing since sliced bread. Well, you see that it's not. And before that, the law was what they called APEG, Adequate Programs for Education in Georgia, which I think was far better than what we have now. But that's something that perhaps we as board members, and we used to do this too, lobby the state legislators, or do it through the government relations committee. Because I'll be honest with you, what I'm thinking is this: the state of Georgia, because the education systems, districts in the state of Georgia, I think they take the largest chunk of that money. But I do believe that they balance the state budget on the back of education. And I don't think that's right, because when QBE was passed, it said 60-40, 60% revenue from the state, 40% from the local dollars. Well, it never happened. Even last year when Governor Deal said, okay, I'm gonna cut out austerity cuts, but we still didn't get 60%. Just think about it, folks. If we didn't have 20 mills, plus if we didn't have a darn good tax system here in Clark County, we would be suffering. But anyway, I just wanted to comment on what you said, Dr. Knox.
And I'll just respond quickly by saying that Mr. Greiner can probably confirm that when we were talking about a 14% cut and that 500,000 not coming to us, that it wasn't that it was 60 from the state and 40 from us, but it was almost the other way around. It was like 57% and change from us and 40 something from the state. So instead of 60-40, it's closer to 40-60. And I do wish that the public would be more aware of that. And government relations, to the credit of that committee, has tried to emphasize this in various gatherings.
Yeah.
All right. I'm looking across our screen to check to see if there are any other questions about our current presentation, or if there are any other lingering questions. I don't see any hands raised, and neither do I see any in our chat area. So I will open the floor for a motion to adjourn if there are no more questions.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Okay. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Now, don't see any opposed. or abstaining. Okay, our meeting is adjourned at 6:31.